Hi, thank you for joining me. Today I'm going to give a speech given by a very famous person, also one of the presidents of the United States. Es gibt nur ein Berlin. There is only one Berlin. Ronald Reagan, an American politician and America's 40th president, gave his famous speech, Tear Down This Wall, to the people of West Berlin. Reagan's speech was given to West Berlin as an attempt to tear down the wall that was dividing the West and the East. Now let's discuss the speech that was West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl said was a stroke of luck for the world, especially Europe. First, we'll discuss the history behind the speech. Then we'll discuss why the speech was given, and last we'll talk about what the outcome was. In 1961, the communist government of East Germany built the wall. They did this to keep Western fascists from getting into the East. They split a community into 4 zones. Eastern part went into the Soviet Union, and the western part was split up between the United States, Great Britain, and eventually France. East German government got permission to stop the immigrants from coming by closing its borders for good. In a short time, they ended up having a makeshift wall, which eventually was the Berlin Wall, that divided one city from the other side. This stopped the refugees from the east to the west. The fall of the wall happened in 1989 after the end of the Cold War. And then that was just a little bit of a background on how the wall got to be built, and then when the wall eventually fell down. So next, let's talk about why Ronald Reagan gave this speech, or what his motive was behind it. He wanted to tear down the wall to open up the barrier that had been dividing East and West Berlin for such a long time. He wanted the speech to be addressed to all of those in Berlin as one. He said that the famous words, Es gibt nur ein Berlin, that there is only one Berlin. He made a statement in his speech about the wall dividing people. He said that standing before the Brandenburg Gate, every man is German. Separated from his fellow men, every man is a Berliner, forced to look upon a scar. And that came from the history place, the Great Speech Collection, titled Ronald Reagan, Tear Down This Wall. So he made another statement, and he stated that as long as the gate's closed and as long as the scar of wall is permitted to stand, it's not the German question alone that remains open, but the question of freedom for all mankind. Yet I do not come here to lament, for I find in Berlin a message of hope. Even in the shadow of this wall, a message of triumph, and that too is from the history place. Reagan was speaking about how they needed to be one, and that they are all the same and they should all be free. So 2 years after Reagan gave his speech, the wall was no longer divided, and the people of the East and the West Berlin could be as one. A spokesperson from the East announced that they had a change in their city's relations with the West, and then that night at midnight that they could move freely throughout the town. There'd be no wall, there would be no anybody telling them, like, you cannot come over. They were going to be able to roam freely like they were all one versus the West and the East. That night, the people of the town and city shouted Tor auf, which means open the gate. And at midnight, they moved across the once divided lines. People that were a part of this, there was people that would stand and wait, right? So when they said that, tear down that wall, there's no more dividing, people just rushed. And they start taking hammers, and they were chiseling. And so the people got name of the woodpeckers for knocking down chunks of the wall. And so finally the word fell. And then there's just some words that are memorable. And it says that you'll just never forget, and were written on the wall that day when the wall was torn down. And it said, only today is the war really over. And I think that's very powerful. Then they were saying, now that this wall has been torn down and it's no longer dividing us, then now the war's over. Yes, the Cold War may have ended, and that may have been done, but it really wasn't over until they could all be one again together. And so I think that was very powerful. And that was from History.com, titled Berlin Wall, A&E Television Networks. Thank you for listening. to the speech. I hope that gave you some insight on Ronald Reagan's motive for giving that speech and the importance of knowing the history of that and the effect that it had on those people. Thank you.